I met Logan at 24 during one of those cramped housewarming parties where everyone's trying too hard to look like they have their lives together. He was standing in the kitchen, completely serious, explaining to our mutual friend why pineapple on pizza was actually a brilliant flavor combination from a culinary science perspective. Something about the acidity balancing the fat content of the cheese. Most guys would have been talking about sports or trying to impress everyone with work stories. But Logan was genuinely passionate about pizza toppings, like it was the most important debate of the century. That's how you get a woman to marry you, I told him, laughing at his earnest expression. He looked up from his slice with this surprised smile, like he hadn't expected anyone to actually be listening to his food theories. That was Logan, brilliant in his own quiet way, but never assuming anyone would care about the things that fascinated him. He was a mechanical engineer, which I initially thought sounded incredibly boring. But Logan had this way of making everything interesting. He'd explain how bridges stayed up, or why certain car engines were more efficient. And somehow his enthusiasm made even the most technical stuff engaging. He remembered that I was allergic to shellfish after I mentioned it once in passing. He'd send me memes during the workday that were actually funny, not just random internet garbage. When I had a rough day, he'd show up with my favorite coffee order without me even asking. The consistency was what got me. Logan was never the loudest guy in the room or the most obviously charming, but he was reliable in a way that felt revolutionary after years of dating guys who couldn't remember my middle name. He called when he said he would. He showed up on time. He listened to my work complaints without trying to immediately fix everything or change the subject to his own problems. 2 years of that steady, genuine affection, and I was completely hooked. Logan made me feel like I was worth paying attention to, worth remembering, worth showing up for consistently. When he proposed during an October hike in the Smoky Mountains, with his carefully planned speech about how I made his life better in ways he'd never expected, I knew I'd found something rare. My father pulled me aside around that time, during one of those family gatherings where everyone's pretending to be interested in each other's lives. "Ash, you've got yourself a good one," he said, watching Logan help my mother figure out her new phone with infinite patience. "Don't mess this up." I remember feeling slightly annoyed by the warning, like he thought I was incapable of recognizing what I had. Of course I knew Logan was special. That's why I was marrying him. Our wedding at Lake Geneva was perfect in that understated way that fit both of us. Nothing too flashy or expensive. Just our families and close friends celebrating something that felt solid and real. Logan cried during his vows, talking about how he'd never expected to find someone who made him want to be better, while also accepting exactly who he was. I felt like I'd won some kind of life lottery, the good guy. The stable future, the partnership that everyone talks about but rarely finds. The first 3 years of marriage were comfortable, in all the best ways. Logan got promoted to senior engineer and started working on these fascinating infrastructure projects. I was climbing the ladder at my marketing firm, taking on bigger clients and more responsibility. We bought a house with a backyard where Logan could work on his vintage motorcycle restoration projects. We took weekend trips to try new restaurants or explore hiking trails. We had inside jokes and comfortable routines, and the kind of easy intimacy that develops when two people genuinely like each other. But comfortable has a way of becoming predictable, and predictable has a way of becoming suffocating. Logan's consistency, which had initially felt so refreshing, started feeling like a cage. I knew exactly what he'd say about my work stories. I could predict his weekend plans down to the hour. He'd come home, kiss me hello in the exact same spot by the kitchen counter, ask about my day while checking his work emails, then spend the evening reading engineering journals or watching documentaries about infrastructure disasters. I started feeling restless in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Logan was still thoughtful and caring, still remembered my coffee order, and sent funny texts during the day. But somewhere along the way, that reliability had become routine, and routine had become boring. I found myself wondering if this was really it. The same conversations, the same weekend patterns, the same predictable affection for the next 40 years. Then I got promoted to senior project lead, which meant working directly with Derek Martinez, one of the company executives. Derek was everything Logan wasn't: commanding presence, quick wit, the kind of natural charisma that made everyone in the room pay attention when he spoke. He was older, more experienced, with this confidence that came from years of making important decisions and having people listen to his opinions. Our first meeting was about the Morrison account, this huge client that could make or break my career trajectory. Derek listened to my presentation with this focused intensity that made me feel like the most important person in the building. He asked smart questions, built on my ideas, treated me like an equal in a way that was both professional and slightly thrilling. When he complimented my strategic thinking, I felt this rush of validation that I hadn't experienced in months. We should grab drinks sometime to discuss the next phase, Derek suggested as we wrapped up the meeting. I think you have some innovative approaches that could really set this campaign apart. It was clearly business, networking, relationship building, the kind of professional development that successful people do. But there was something in the way he said it. The way he held eye contact just a beat longer than necessary. That made my pulse quicken. I started staying later at the office, finding excuses to discuss projects with Derek when most of the other staff had gone home. Our conversations would drift from business to more personal topics, travel experiences, career ambitions, observations about office politics. Derek was fascinating in ways that Logan simply wasn't. He'd lived in different cities, managed major corporate transitions, had opinions about art and politics and culture that came from actually experiencing things rather than just reading about them. The text messages started innocently enough. Project updates that included personal jokes, links to articles he thought I'd find interesting, comments about presentations or meetings that showed he was paying attention to my contributions in ways that felt flattering and professional. I told myself it was networking, career development, the kind of mentoring relationship that successful women needed to cultivate. But I was lying to myself, and part of me knew it. The texts were becoming more frequent, more personal, more flirtatious. Derek would compliment my intelligence, my ambition, my insights in ways that made me feel seen and appreciated. He'd make subtle observations about my appearance. That presentation style really suits you, or you have excellent instincts about client psychology. That felt professional enough to be appropriate, but personal enough to be exciting. Logan, meanwhile, continued being exactly himself. Reliable, caring, predictably affectionate. He'd ask about my work with genuine interest, but his questions were surface level compared to Derek's sophisticated understanding of corporate strategy. He'd suggest weekend activities that sounded pleasant but uninspiring compared to Derek's stories about business trips to interesting cities and important industry events. I started feeling like I was living two different lives. At home with Logan, I was the comfortable wife going through familiar motions, dinner conversations about his infrastructure projects, weekend errands, predictable intimacy that felt more like habit than passion. At work with Derek, I was this dynamic professional woman engaged in stimulating conversations with someone who actually challenged my thinking. The first time Derek and I crossed a line, we were working late on the Morrison presentation. Most of the office was empty, and we'd ordered takeout to fuel a strategy session that had stretched past 9 o'clock. Derek was sitting closer than necessary, ostensibly to review documents on my laptop screen. But I could feel the energy between us crackling with possibility. You know, he said, looking up from the presentation slides, I've worked with a lot of talented people, but you have this rare combination of creativity and strategic thinking that's really impressive. His hand brushed mine as he reached for his coffee, and instead of pulling away, I let the contact linger. I appreciate that, I said, meeting his gaze directly. It's nice to work with someone who actually gets what I'm trying to accomplish. The conversation had shifted into territory that wasn't quite professional anymore, but wasn't quite personal either. We were dancing around something that felt inevitable and dangerous and thrilling. When Derek kissed me that night, leaning across the conference table with the presentation still glowing on the laptop screen, I didn't stop him. I kissed him back with 6 months of restless energy and frustration and hunger for something more exciting than my predictable marriage. It wasn't love. I knew that even in the moment. It was ego and power, and the intoxicating rush of being wanted by someone who didn't have to want me. For 6 months, I lived this double life with increasing skill and decreasing guilt. Derek and I would find opportunities to be together, late work sessions, off-site meetings, business lunches that stretched into the afternoon. He made me feel sophisticated and desirable in ways that Logan's steady affection couldn't match. With Derek, I was this dynamic woman having an exciting affair with a powerful man. With Logan, I was just a wife going through the motions. The compartmentalization became almost effortless. I'd spend an afternoon with Derek, feeling alive and desired and sophisticated, then come home to Logan and kiss him goodnight like nothing had changed. I'd laugh at his jokes over dinner while texting Derek about our next meeting. I became an expert at living in two completely separate realities. And honestly, I was proud of how well I managed it. Logan never suspected anything, which made it easier to justify. He continued being his usual thoughtful, unobservant self, bringing me coffee in the morning, asking about my day, sharing stories about his work projects with the same enthusiasm he'd always shown. His consistency, which had once felt comforting, now felt like evidence that he was too predictable to hold my attention. If he'd been more exciting, more unpredictable, more like Derek, maybe I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. I told myself I deserved this. I deserved to feel desired and appreciated by someone who understood ambition and sophistication. I deserved conversations that challenged me intellectually and professionally. I deserved the thrill of being pursued by someone who didn't take me for granted the way Logan had started to. The affair wasn't about hurting Logan. It was about finally getting the kind of excitement and validation that had been missing from my life. But Logan was more observant than I'd given him credit for. At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March, I woke up to find him sitting on our couch with my phone in his hands, looking like he'd seen something horrible. The expression on his face wasn't anger or hurt. It was this cold, calculating look that I'd never seen before. "I hope it was worth it," he said quietly, setting my phone down on the coffee table between us. "I promise you, I'll get my revenge, not with anger, with strategy." That was it. No yelling, no crying, no dramatic confrontation. Just that calm statement delivered in a tone I didn't recognize, followed by Logan getting up and walking to the guest bedroom. The door closed with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than slamming would have been. I sat on the couch staring at my phone, trying to figure out exactly what he'd seen and how much he knew. But more than that, I was shocked by his reaction. This wasn't the Logan I'd married, the non-confrontational engineer who avoided conflict and processed emotions quietly. This was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who talked about strategy and revenge, like he'd been planning for this possibility. The next 3 weeks were the most uncomfortable of my life. Logan didn't ask questions about the affair or demand explanations or try to work things out. He simply withdrew. He slept in the guest room, spoke to me only when necessary, and went about his daily routine like I was a roommate he barely tolerated. His silence was somehow worse than anger would have been. I could have dealt with accusations or demands or emotional outbursts. I had no idea how to handle this cold, strategic distance. I tried to apologize, to explain, to somehow minimize what had happened. Logan listened politely when I attempted these conversations, then would nod and say something like, "I understand," or "that makes sense," in this neutral tone that made it clear he wasn't actually engaging with anything I said. It was like trying to have a meaningful conversation with a polite stranger. 3 weeks after that awful night, Logan had me served with divorce papers. Not a conversation about marriage counseling or working things out, just legal documents, delivered by a professional process server who handed them to me at work, like I was being served for a parking ticket. The papers were thorough, clearly prepared by someone who understood exactly what they wanted and how to get it efficiently. Logan didn't want alimony or any complicated asset division. He wanted out, quickly and completely, with minimal financial entanglement. The house, the shared accounts, the accumulated possessions of 5 years together. He was willing to walk away from all of it if it meant ending the marriage without prolonged legal battles. It was like he'd calculated the cost of freedom and decided that everything we'd built together was worth sacrificing to escape cleanly. The divorce was finalized in 90 days, which my lawyer said was record time for our county. Logan had approached the whole process with the same methodical efficiency he brought to his engineering projects, identifying the desired outcome, determining the most direct path to achieve it, then executing the plan without wasted motion or emotional detours. I kept expecting him to change his mind, to want to talk, to show some sign that our 5 years together had meant something worth fighting for. But Logan treated the divorce like a technical problem that required a technical solution. I was a variable that had introduced chaos into his system, and removing me was simply a matter of following the correct procedures. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, both Derek and I were terminated from our jobs. Human Resources received an anonymous report with detailed documentation of our affair, including emails, text messages, and evidence of company policy violations. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Logan had waited until our divorce was complete before submitting evidence that would destroy both our careers. That was when I finally understood what Logan had meant about strategy. He hadn't acted impulsively or emotionally. He'd planned every step, from the divorce timeline to the professional consequences, with the same careful precision he used for engineering projects. My predictable, non-confrontational husband had orchestrated the complete destruction of my life with methodical efficiency. Derek landed a new executive position within 3 weeks of our termination. Apparently, powerful men with impressive resumes can overcome workplace scandals more easily than women who were sleeping with their bosses. He stopped returning my calls immediately after we were fired, like I'd suddenly become toxic to his professional reputation. The man who spent 6 months telling me how special and intelligent I was disappeared the moment our affair became inconvenient for his career. I spent the next several months applying for jobs that I was completely overqualified for and getting rejected from positions I could have done in my sleep. My LinkedIn profile, which had once generated multiple inquiries per week, went completely quiet. Industry contacts stopped responding to my messages. It became clear that word had spread through professional networks in ways that made me essentially unemployable at my previous level. The studio apartment I could afford on my savings was a far cry from the house Logan and I had shared. I lived on ramen noodles and generic cereal, watching my bank account dwindle while sending out dozens of applications that went nowhere. The sophisticated, successful woman I'd been during the affair had been replaced by someone who couldn't get callbacks for entry-level positions. Logan, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. His social media accounts, which he'd made private immediately after the divorce, occasionally showed glimpses of a life that looked happier and healthier than anything we'd shared. He'd lost weight, started traveling, appeared to be enjoying the freedom that came with removing me from his life. The contrast between his apparent success and my obvious failure was impossible to ignore. Eventually, a woman named Layla called me about an IT assistant position at a logistics company, a job that paid roughly half of what I'd been making before the affair and required none of the skills I'd spent years developing. But I was desperate enough to take anything, grateful just to have someone willing to hire me, despite the professional reputation I destroyed. Sitting in that sterile office building, doing basic administrative work for supervisors who were younger and less experienced than I was. I finally had to confront the reality of what I'd done. I'd traded a marriage to someone who genuinely loved me for a 6-month affair with someone who discarded me the moment it became inconvenient. I'd destroyed a stable, comfortable life for the temporary thrill of feeling desired by a man who never actually cared about me. Logan had been right about strategy. While I was caught up in the excitement of the affair, he'd been planning the systematic destruction of everything I'd worked to build. The quiet, predictable man I'd found so boring had turned out to be far more calculating than Derek, far more strategic than me, far more capable of long-term thinking than either of his supposed intellectual superiors. The worst part wasn't the financial consequences or the professional humiliation or even the social isolation. The worst part was realizing that I'd had something genuinely valuable and thrown it away for something completely worthless. Logan had loved me consistently and faithfully for 5 years, and I'd repaid that devotion by convincing myself I deserved better. I'd been greedy and selfish and stupid, and now I was living with the permanent consequences of those choices. I still check Logan's social media sometimes, though he's made most of it private and clearly has no interest in maintaining any connection to his former life. From what I can see, he's doing well, better than well. Actually, he looks like someone who's been freed from something that was holding him back. Someone who's discovered that life is more interesting without me in it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd appreciated what I had instead of looking for something more exciting. If I'd put the energy I'd invested in the affair into revitalizing my marriage. If I'd been honest with Logan about feeling restless instead of seeking validation from Derek. But those thoughts are pointless now. I made my choices, and Logan made his. And the consequences are exactly what I deserved. I'm 31 years old, living alone in a studio apartment, working a job that barely pays my bills, with no romantic prospects and few professional options. Logan is 32, apparently happier than he's been in years, free from a wife who never appreciated his consistent love and genuine character. Derek is somewhere climbing corporate ladders with a clean slate and no lasting consequences for his actions. The affair lasted 6 months. The marriage it destroyed had lasted 5 years. The consequences will last the rest of my life. I thought I was smart enough to manage a double life, sophisticated enough to handle a complex situation, deserving enough to pursue what I wanted regardless of who got hurt. I was wrong about all of it, and now I'm living with exactly the life those choices earned me.